under the age of 17, then you can claim and qualify for that particular credit. Now, at the moment that your dependent turns 17, so if your dependent turns 17 anytime in 2024, since we are on the 2024 tax year, so if your dependent turns 17 anytime in 2024, you no longer qualify for the child tax credit. Now, does that mean that you can't claim your dependent? No, you still can claim your dependent because you might qualify for some other credits, or your dependent might help you qualify for head of household. But just because you do not qualify for a child tax credit does not necessarily mean you have to stop claiming your dependent. So, for child tax credit, if your dependent turns 17 in the year 2024, know that you're not going to qualify for any of that credit, and that can affect your tax return up to $2,000. Now, mind you, it's not going to affect everybody's tax return $2,000 because a lot of people don't qualify for the full child tax credit. So, it can possibly affect your tax return up to $2,000. Now, who that's really gonna hurt? It's gonna hurt a lot of middle income and high income taxpayers because that is the credit that ultimately helps you reduce your tax liability and possibly get you some money back in a refund to get you some of that money that you pay in back. Now, if you are on the lower side of income wise, it might not affect you as much because you might not get up to $2,000, and you still might qualify for the earned income tax credit, which is the biggest credit for a lot of people when you talk about dependents. So you can claim your dependent. You can claim your dependent over age 17. You just will not qualify for the child tax credit. Now, the next credit that you'll qualify for or possibly can qualify for is the earned income tax credit. Now, with the earned income tax credit, you can claim your dependent as long as they're 18 and under. Whether they're in school or not, you can still claim them. And then when they're over 18, you can claim them between the age of 19 to 23 if they are a full-time student. So this is where a lot of people drop the ball on missing out on credits and missing out on money because when your dependent turns 19 or they graduate from high school, you just automatically assume you cannot no longer claim them, and that's not true. If your dependent will still be a dependent if they're between the ages of 19 to 23 and they are a full-time student in school. And it doesn't matter if they live directly with you or if they're like in a dorm in another city or not. If they're in school, they're temporarily away from the home, so your address is still their address no matter what address they put down. But you do qualify to claim your dependents, and this again is where I see a lot of people dropping the ball, missing money out because now that the kids are older, they're learning about taxes. They're thinking, oh, I can find myself, and you're thinking you cannot claim them. You can claim them. It depends on, again, how much money they make, and if they're providing over 50% of their own support. If they're not providing over 50% of their own support, they are still your dependent if they are a full-time student. Now, if they're not a full-time student and they're just ages 19 and 23 and they make over $4,700, then no, you cannot claim them as a dependent. But a lot of y'all dependents are full-time students that go off to school, and so you still can claim them even if they have a job. And that's the other misconception when it comes to whether or not you can claim your dependent or not. A lot of people think when their dependent starts working that they can no longer claim that dependent, and you can still claim them. What ends up happening is that now that they are working, they can file their own tax return as well. But when they file their tax return, you have to check a box that says that they can be claimed by someone else. And if they had some federal taxes withheld, they possibly can get a refund back. Now, what I'm seeing as a problem with a lot of dependents that's working is that they're not having any taxes withheld, which ultimately a lot of times end up making them owe depends on how much money they made, because they haven't had any taxes withheld, and because they owe, now you feel like you shouldn't claim them. Your dependent has to be providing over 50% of their own support. If you're still providing support for them, that means that you still need to claim them. If they still live in your house for more than 6 months out the year, and the only exception to that is if they at a temporary place like college, then you still should be claiming them. So don't allow your dependents to control whether or not you are supposed to claim them or not. The IRS has certain rules and guidelines in reference to who's a dependent and who's not a dependent. Again, when your dependents are over the age of 19, over the age of 18, 19 to 23, a lot of them still should be claimed on your taxes, because their qualification as a dependent, they check off all the boxes. They're 19 to 23. They do not provide their own support. They're full-time students, so you should claim them. And then another thing that a lot of people don't understand is, okay, you have dependents that are like between the ages of 18 to 23, and they might have their own child. And so because they had their own child, you assume that they can just file their own child because they worked. So the rules for these credits is who made the most income, right? Is they providing over 50% support? Is they a full-time student? Because if they're a full-time student, you still provide support for them and their dependent. And they're between the ages of 19 to 23, you are supposed to claim them and their dependents. And if you're watching and you're in that age range, a lot of y'all think that you're no longer a dependent. In order for you to no longer be a dependent, you have to provide over 50% of your own support. Point blank, period. If somebody else is providing that, then you are a dependent of them, and you all can claim them. And when their age is 19 to 23, even though you no longer qualify for child tax credit, just depends on whether or not you had to get loans or pay out of pocket for their tuition, you now possibly can qualify for an education credit for them. So a lot of you, a lot of times, are missing a lot of money because you don't know that you can still claim your dependents. So again, just let me do a wrap up of how everything works. If you have a dependent for EITC and your dependent is 18 and under, regardless if they go to school or not, the only thing exception to that rule is that they're not providing over 50% of their own support, then they are your dependent. If you have dependents that are between the ages of 19 to 23 and they are a full-time student and they are not providing over 50% of their support, then they are your dependent. Regardless if they work or not, they have to be providing over 50% of their support. What we know is a lot of them do work, but they don't pay no bills. Okay, they not helping you with no bills. They blowing their money. So that means that they are still your dependent. Now, when it comes to child tax credit, you no longer qualify for that credit if your dependent is under, if your dependent turned 17 in the tax year. So we are in tax year 2024. If your dependent turned 17 anytime in 2024, even if it was on December 31st, you will not qualify for child tax credit this year. Now, it's another credit which is what is it called? ODC, which is a other dependent credit. You possibly will qualify for that. Now, that is fully a non-refundable credit. It's only up to $500, but it can help somebody out, right? So that's the only credit you qualify for them when it comes to the child tax credit wise. Now, if they're under age of 17, you qualify up to $2,000. I think it's a misconception of people thinking that you automatically get $2,000 for the child tax credit, and that's not true either. It's a certain calculation that determines how much of that you actually qualify for, and it's a interchangeable thing with the child tax credit. You have the child tax credit, which is a non-refundable credit, and then you have the additional child tax credit, which is a refundable credit. And whether you get the refundable portion or not would depend on if you met your tax liability or not. Um, Again, if your dependent is the ages of 19 to 23, they're not providing over 50% of their own support, and they're a full time student. If you're paying out of pocket or with student loans for their tuition, not their room and board, but their tuition, then you possibly can qualify for an education credit. And then if your dependent is under 18 and under, and or even if they over 19 and they didn't haven't made more than $4,700. I think it's $4,700. It might be $4,900. I haven't really looked at it. It's 4,000 and something. Then you can claim them, but you might not get a tax credit for them. You might, if they're your only dependent, you might now qualify for head of household, and head of household can benefit some taxpayers. In some cases it don't benefit you at all, but that's a whole nother video. Okay, so I hope y'all understand. What I do need y'all to do is really share this video out. Share this video out. Make sure you tag people in this video, because this is, to me, one of the most important videos I do the whole tax season. And the reason why is because so many people don't understand what age they are supposed to stop claiming their dependent. And I see a lot of people missing out on a lot of money because they're unaware. Okay. So make sure y'all tag this video. Make sure y'all share this video out. I might not have told you who I am. Thank you. I might not